Hello, I'm Igor Kule, welcoming you to the next edition of the Eastern Europe Review, the program that talks about countries east of Poland, mainly Russia, Belarus and Ukraine. This is a joint production of BELSAT TV and TVP World. And here is what we've prepared for you today. 3 Russian journalists who criticized the Kremlin claim to be victims of poisoning. Who is behind this crime?
If I had asked Elena a month or two earlier, she would not have told me that it was poisoning, because at first she was sure that it was just some kind of illness.
It is an honor to die for one's country. Military propaganda in Russian schools is on the rise.
What we sometimes hear from President Putin in terms of historical interpretations can be heard from people who aren't well educated. These are stereotypes.
Belarusians love potatoes, debunking Lukashenko's claims of turning Belarus into a potato superpower.
This tradition started during Soviet times when there were good, favorable conditions.
On the 20th of August 2020, a significant poisoning incident took place. Alexei Navalny, a prominent figure in Russian politics and Putin's main opponent, was poisoned. Though he survived the attempt, the Kremlin has persisted in its practice of poisoning activists, journalists and politicians who pose a challenge to the regime. In the past year, a new wave of poisonings has affected those who have left Russia, this time occurring within European territories.
Elena Kostyuchenko is one of the most honored Russian journalists. During the first weeks of the Russian invasion, she was in Ukraine and wrote several texts for Novaya Gazeta from there, which became important evidence of the war and the crimes committed by the Russian military. When the newspaper's operations were halted by the decision of Russian authorities, Kostyuchenko decided to continue her reporting work by heading to Mariupol, which was still under Ukrainian control at that time. Suddenly, a colleague from Novaya Gazeta informed her that the forces of Chechen governor Ramzan Kadyrov, who held control over checkpoints around the city, had received orders to locate and assassinate her. Following this, it became evident that she couldn't return to Russia. Consequently, she relocated to Germany. On October 17, 2022, she experienced the initial symptoms: severe abdominal pain, intense dizziness rendering her unable to stand, and continuous nausea, occasionally escalating into vomiting.
The substance with which I was poisoned has not yet been established. The toxicologists who advised the investigative projects, the Insider and Bellingcat, believe it was an organochlorine compound. They think dichloroethane, most likely.
Elena's case is not the only one in recent times. The second poisoning, which targeted Natalia Arnault, the president of the Free Russia Foundation, occurred in Prague. And another instance was the poisoning of radio journalist from Echo Moscow, Irina Bablonyan, which took place in Tbilisi.
I was talking to journalist Irina Bablonyan, who was poisoned in Georgia a week after I had my first symptoms. We have very similar symptoms. They coincide to the smallest detail. The place of localization of pain, for example, is quite unusual, above the stomach in the region of the solar plexus.
Apart from the European police, investigations into all confirmed poisoning cases are also conducted by the Insider and Bellingcat teams of journalists. They have also decided to disclose everything that is currently known about the events, even though the investigation has not yet been concluded.
Мы обычно пишем только когда идентифицируем преступников.
We usually release texts only when we identify criminals. And here we understood that we are still quite far from the end of the investigation, because we are not really used to working with other countries. We have good databases and opportunities in Russia, but in Europe it doesn't work that way. So we need to come up with some completely new tools.
Roman adds that it was necessary to publish the information right now in order to warn all journalists and activists who left Russia and believe that they are safe in Europe.
If I had asked Elena a month or two earlier, she would not have told me that it was poisoning, because at first she was sure that it was just some kind of illness, until her own doctors in Germany told her that it was poisoning, and until another independent doctor who advises us and who had the opportunity to analyze all of Kostyuchenko's tests came to the conclusion that it could only be poisoning.
Poisoning political opponents is the Kremlin's favorite tactic. Many cases of poisoning are well documented, including those of politicians Alexei Navalny and Vladimir Kara-Murza, or FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko. Now, the main question that needs to be answered is who carried out these acts in Europe, where the Russian authorities, it would seem, have limited capabilities.
Museums dedicated to the so-called special military operation are being established in schools throughout Russia under the directive of President Vladimir Putin. These exhibitions are primarily aimed at children. It is anticipated that these displays will consistently emphasize to students that Russia is supposedly countering global Nazism. Moreover, in the upcoming academic year, teenagers will be taught using new history textbooks that draw comparisons between Ukraine and Hitler's Germany.
This is the Museum of Russia's War with Ukraine in Saratov, situated in the southeastern European part of the country. Saratov is a city with a population of nearly 1 million. The exhibition harkens to the book 1984 by British author George Orwell that features the famous slogans, "War is peace, ignorance is strength." Here, the assault on a neighboring country is labeled as defense against an aggressor. Supposedly, the authorities had no alternative, as explained by the regional head, Roman Busargin. According to the governor, the global intent is now focused on dismantling Russia.
Young people will come here. Children will come here to remember and not to forget the heroic actions that Saratov citizens have carried out while defending our country.
It's nearly impossible to discern from the exhibition the precise feats accomplished by Russian soldiers and mercenaries who fought on foreign soil. The displays feature models of mines, fragments of rockets, flamethrowers, and other weaponry. A majority of the exhibits convey the message to visitors that Nazism, supposedly aided by European nations and the United States, is thriving in Ukraine.
Fighting against Nazism, and that's the worst part. Somebody here, somebody somewhere else thinking it won't affect him, but believe me, if nothing is done now, it will affect everyone in the near future.
Russian propagandists have put a special emphasis on Ukrainian school textbooks, which describe the pro-Russian separatist takeover of parts of Donbass and the annexation of Crimea in 2014. According to them, the portrayal of events leading to the occupation of Ukraine's territory presented here can serve as a manual for killing Russians. On the other hand, the new Russian history textbooks, recently introduced by the Russian Minister of Education, label Ukraine as a neo-Nazi state. The textbook authors depict the war as a supposed unifying force for all of Russian society. Starting from the new school year, all Russian high school students will be learning from these textbooks.
History has always been used, is being used, and will continue to be used for propaganda purposes. The problem is that the current war doesn't only stem from, and not so much from, the mercantile interests of the authorities, but an interest in history. This interest is of a Philistine nature. What we sometimes hear from President Putin in terms of historical interpretations can be heard from people who aren't well educated. These are stereotypes, but state policy is based on such myths. The state imposes them on the vast population of the country, and the trouble is that many people share such myths.
Dying at the front is seen as honorable. Promoting peace is deemed a crime. This is the type of propaganda that the Russian authorities are currently disseminating. Everyone who expresses disagreement or engages in protest faces criminal charges. The exhibition in Saratov will be fully operational at the start of the school year on September the 1st. School children will be mandated to visit the museum as entire classes. As per Vladimir Putin's directives, similar exhibitions should be established in all Russian regions by the end of this year.
Potatoes, considered the Belarusian national product, are being grown less and less in Belarus itself. Lukashenko's propaganda highlights the types of potatoes other countries aspire to, as well as the broad geography of exports. And the most important aspect is as if Lukashenko himself made the potato a national symbol. However, statistics reveal something entirely different. During Lukashenko's rule, potato exports have significantly decreased, and even domestic demand for potatoes has been drastically reduced.
The demand for potatoes in Belarus, which long have been a symbol of the country, is decreasing. This staple food holds a significant place in local cuisine and agriculture. Potatoes have become an integral part of folk culture, local humor, and have even evolved into an ironic nickname for Belarusians from their neighbors, bulbashi, derived from the Belarusian word bulba, meaning potato.
This tradition started during Soviet times when there were good, favorable conditions. We had a population that could be driven to collective farms for harvesting, and we had fertilizers that didn't need to be transported from far away, as in Kazakhstan: phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium.
During the Soviet era, Belarus was already a major exporter of potatoes. Meanwhile, the state media of the Lukashenko regime have created the image of potatoes as a national product, as if Alexander Lukashenko made them so. However, statistics say the opposite. During his time in power, there is less and less of this national symbol in the country. In 1994, when Lukashenko became the president of Belarus, potatoes in the country were grown on 697,000 hectares. Last year, that number had decreased significantly to only 173,000 hectares.
According to the latest data, the total cultivated area dedicated to potatoes across all farms, collective farms and private individuals as a whole, is about 3% of the overall cultivated land.
The majority of agricultural land today is primarily allocated for cultivating grain and industrial crops like rapeseed or corn. Belarus places a greater emphasis on cultivating vegetables, fruits, and berries. This shift is attributed to the gradual decrease in consumer interest in potatoes as people seek greater food diversity. However, Belarusians still consume 160 kilograms of potatoes per capita per year, the highest amount when compared to other countries.
The level of self-sufficiency in potatoes for 2021 was 100% of the required volume. During that period, Belarus achieves a self-sufficiency level of 263% for milk and 134% for meat.
This indicates that dairy and meat products are being exported, while potatoes are either not exported or are sold in limited quantities. Currently, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food mentions a diverse range of export destinations, including Russia, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Serbia, and even Kazakhstan, which itself engages in potato exports. When Lukashenko started ruling the country, more than 8 million tons of potatoes were harvested from the fields. However, last year, the harvest did not even reach 4 million tons. Both the demand and the productivity of Belarusian potato varieties are declining.
The Ministry of Agriculture imports and cultivates mainly imported types of potatoes, with German types leading in our country. And in relation to the sanctions, it causes a lot of difficulties. I think that if this continues, we will not have a supply of seed material from abroad, and in a couple of years, the situation in potato cultivation will be even worse.
If in 2020, potatoes in Belarus cost an average of approximately 32 cents per kilogram, this year they cost $1.18. Similarly, potatoes experienced a price increase on the global market. However, extensive Western sanctions could potentially disrupt seed imports to Belarus, resulting in lower yields. If this occurs, it could further drive up prices for the primary Belarusian vegetable.
And that's it for today. The Eastern Europe Review will be back next Sunday. Please stay with us, keep watching TVP World, and support Ukraine.